The Shadow Isles remain dormant for a long time now. Usually we get more updates on this place during Harrowing in late October, so it was a little bit of a surprise to see another update now, since Mordekaiser is confirmed to arrive during the second split of 2019, which is probably in less than a month. It makes sense for Riot to try and prepare the Shadow Isles for his arrival. That's why we got 2 new updates for Hecarim and Kalista. Now, previously, both of them fit into the new universe really well, so don't expect massive changes, but you should expect interesting changes. Last thing to mention before we dive into today's story is that we will split Hecarim and Kalista into 2 separate videos, because their stories got much deeper. So without further ado, let's start with the updated story of Kalista. When Kalista was still alive, she was a general and the niece to the king of a forgotten empire. She was loyal and she always followed the code of honor. The king had many enemies, and when these enemies sent assassins to kill him, it was Kalista's duty to protect him. However, during one of these assassination attempts, Kalista deflected a poisoned blade that was supposed to hit the king, and unfortunately it sliced the arm of the queen instead. The king summoned the greatest healers and priests, but no one was able to draw the poison from her body. Out of desperation, the king sent Kalista into the world to find a cure. And while she was gone, Hecarim of the Iron Order would take Kalista's place as the king's protector. Kalista traveled far, consulting all sorts of scholars, hermits and mystics, but no one would help her. But at least she learned about a place protected from the outside world by shimmering pale mist. It was rumored that the inhabitants of that place knew the secrets of eternal life, so Kalista set sail on her last voyage of hope, to the almost legendary Blessed Isles. When she approached the mists, the guardians of the capital city, which we know as Helya, saw the purity of Kalista's intent, and so they parted the mist and allowed her safe passage. When she arrived, she begged them to heal the queen, and after much consideration, the masters agreed. There was little time left, but while the queen was alive, there was still hope for her in the fabled waters of life. So they gave Kalista a talisman that would allow her to return to Helya without the help of the masters. But she was forbidden to share the knowledge of the Blessed Isles with anyone. However, when Kalista finally arrived home, the queen was already dead, and the king descended into madness, locking himself in his tower with the queen's festering corpse. When he learned that Kalista returned, he demanded to know what she had found out. But Kalista admitted that while she did find a cure, it would be useless. She didn't say what it was or how it worked. Remember, she was forbidden to share anything about the Blessed Isles, but from the masters she knew that the cure only worked on the living, and so it would be useless. Since the king saw the refusal of sharing her knowledge as treason, Kalista was put in jail. Later, Hecarim managed to convince Kalista to lead them to the Blessed Isles, even though it was against the rules. By doing that, the king would learn the truth himself, and perhaps he would find peace. This was a good enough reason for Kalista to agree. And so, the king took the fastest ships, and he cried out in joy as the city of Helya was revealed before him. However, when they landed, they were met by the masters who would not allow them to pass. They insisted that death was final. To cheat it would to break the natural order of the world. This enraged the king, and he commanded Kalista to slay anyone in their way. But Kalista refused, and she called on Hecarim to stand with her. But instead, Hecarim drove his spear through her back, and the soldiers of the Iron Order joined him, piercing Kalista's body a dozen times. After this, a chaotic fight broke out. It was a battle between Kalista's followers and the soldiers of the Iron Order. As Kalista's life faded, she watched her warriors die, swearing vengeance with her final breath. When Kalista opened her eyes again, she was filled with unnatural magic. She had no idea what happened, but the city of Helya had been transformed into a twisted mockery of its former beauty. In fact, the entirety of the Blessed Isles was now a place of shadows and darkness, filled with howling spirits trapped for all eternity in the nightmare of undeath. Unfortunately, over time, Kalista's fragments of her memory slowly faded, and now all that remains is a spectre filled with hunger for revenge. In fact, revenge is what defined her now, and she became the Spear of Vengeance, a folklore figure summoned by people all over the world who faced similar treacheries to hers. This was the new bio of Kalista. As I mentioned, not much has changed, but still we got some new information. For example, I'm not sure if this was the case before, but Kalista was now confirmed to be the niece of the ruined king. Also, in her old story, Kalista was able to part the mist that protected the Blessed Isles because she essentially knew the password. The new story makes this a little bit better. Instead of the masters sharing the password with Kalista and risking that it gets leaked into the world, they gave Kalista a talisman that would part the mist. That way only the person with that talisman can pass through. Fortunately, this wasn't the only story we got. There is also the short story called The Echoes Left Behind, which gives us more context on how the ghosts and specters work. Now, without spoiling anything yet, I want you to pay attention to one thing that will be mentioned in this story. Later on, Kalista will be called the Spear of the Argent Throne. To many, this may be just a random name, but if you have a look at the map, the only Argent place we have are the Argent Mountains. It's a place between Noxus and Demacia. Coincidentally, we don't know what's there. So the chances are this is where Kalista's Forgotten Empire was. And this is where the Ruined King comes from. Anyway, since this short story is not the shortest, let's cut it down to a TLDR version. So without further ado, let's get right into it. The story begins with a dying soldier, bleeding out on the white stone around him. His blade laid nearby, broken. He was surrounded by his killers, but he only focused on the woman next to him. As calmness descended upon him in his final moment, he felt no pain, no fear, no doubt. He couldn't be with her in life, but he would be with her in death. Suddenly, a voice that shouldn't be there called out his name. Ledros. The name was followed with a laugh and a cling of chains. Of course, it was none other than Thresh, the Chain Warden, who brought Ledros back into reality. Suddenly, the blood beneath Ledros was centuries old, and the white stone was black and cracked. The sky was dark, illuminated by occasional lightning, and everywhere around them the black mist coiled. In fact, Ledros himself was dead, a spectre trapped between life and death. He picked up his broken sword and faced Thresh, who lurked in the shadows. This wasn't the first time he saw Thresh. He was haunted by him for centuries. But this was the first time he met Thresh in the little sanctuary Ledros created. Every time Ledros died, he was brought back to this place, to his corpse. Such is the fate of those cursed by the Black Mist. Ledros panicked a little bit when he realized his necklace was gone, and the panic was overtaken by rage when he saw Thresh holding it. Suddenly, Ledros' eyes blazed, and his broken blade flared with undying flames, filling the empty space where the rest of his blade should have been. He took a step towards Thresh without fear. In life, Ledros was a big man full of wrath and violence. He was the king's champion, and he was now towering over the Chain Warden. Ledros threatened him, ready to strike Thresh down should he had to. Thresh taunted him as a response. He said that he could try to cut him down, but then he tossed the necklace on the ground, saying that it means nothing to him anyway, perhaps showing that even the Chain Warden himself can be threatened by stronger specters. Ledros then put the necklace on, and he asked Thresh about his view on this forsaken place. He wanted to know if Thresh doesn't want all of this to end, and to finally be at peace. But Thresh simply said no. While to some this might seem like a prison, to him this was a gift. A gift that made them gods. After this, Thresh waved at Ledros to finally leave, as he always did. Ledros was on his special quest after all. He wanted to save his love. But Thresh asked him, why was he doing it? What was he trying to save her from? She didn't seem tormented. Ledros, on the other hand, that was a different story. Thresh asked Ledros if he was doing this for her, or perhaps if he was doing it for himself. As always, these words seeded doubt into Ledros' heart. But he knew what Thresh was doing, and his will would not be broken so easily. Thresh then said that he didn't even need to torture Ledros. He seemed to be doing that himself. With that, the Chain Warden stepped into the darkness, leaving Ledros utterly alone. After a moment, Ledros followed, and he stepped into the mist, letting it flow him around. The black mist served as a special means of transport to the specters. Wherever the mist extended by blindly reaching around, they were able to go. The mist itself was their prison. After a while, Ledros re-emerged from the black mist at the edge of a dark forest. He could sense his love nearby. He had an iron shield strapped to his arm, although he didn't remember putting it on. He searched through the woods until he found a group of shadowy spirits riding spectral steeds below him in the valley. They moved swiftly, waving between the trees. They moved as one, like a hunting party, yet they were the ones being hunted. Ledros broke into a run, keeping pace with them. Then the voice of a hunter echoed through the trees. It sounded like a group of voices that overlapped one another, but one of them was stronger than the rest. Ledros quickened his pace, running fast and low. The riders were slowed down by massive stone ruins and fallen trees, and Ledros was able to overtake them. He jumped down a cliff and landed 30 feet lower, right in front of them, the earth cracking from the impact. When the riders noticed him, they stopped their horses few paces in front of him. They didn't want to attack Ledros. As the first of the horsemen said, they had no quarrel with him. But Ledros replied that their quarrel will last until the end of time itself. With that, the horsemen charged forward. Suddenly, in a blink of an eye, one of the riders got impaled by a glowing spear. His steed turned into smoke, and the rider screamed as he followed it into nothingness, becoming one with the black mist once again. The second spear followed shortly, taking down another target. Ledros turned his head to see the source of this havoc, and he saw his love, Kalista. He watched her as she danced between the trees, expertly handling the ghastly spears and taking the riders down one by one. While everyone was focused on her now, two of the horsemen charged at Ledros. With a quick sidestep, he was able to slam one of the steeds with his shield, but the lance of the other horseman hit Ledros in the side, punching through his armor. In response, Ledros slashed with his spectral blade and cut through the steed's neck. And without his steed, the horseman was an easy target for another one of Kalista's spears. Moments later, the woods were quiet again. Kalista was ready to leave and look for more prey, but Ledros called her name after her, forcing her to stop and turn around. There was no hint of recognition in her eyes, her expression was lifeless, and she answered with their current name. They were the Spear of Vengeance. But Ledros replied with her old title. She was Kalista, Spear of the Argent Throne. He knew what Kalista would say next, because he had already done this many times before. We are retribution, speak your pledge or be gone. Ledros had this entire conversation memorized. As always, he told her about her past, who she was, and who she served. He also told her how they were acquainted with each other. This made Kalista stop for a while, but then she turned and walked away. But then Ledros showed her his necklace. It was a pendant that Ledros knew could break through Kalista's memories. After all, he tried to give this pendant to Kalista when she was still alive. And just like that, it made her stay a while longer. Suddenly, Kalista could remember fragments of her past. But that's as far as Ledros could ever go. In his many prior attempts to bring Kalista back into reality, no matter what he did, she always turns around and walks away in the end. Next, Kalista started remembering what happened. How she tried to save the queen, how she was forced to bring the king to these lands. But then she remembered Hecarim's betrayal, and just like that, her cold expression returned. Ledros witnessed this many times, but he never figured out what to do next. This filled him with fear and dread, as if hope itself walked away from him. Sometimes, after these encounters with Kalista, Ledros tried to ventilate his rage, and he joined the hunt of Bilgewater during the harrowing. But other times he tried to end himself for good. He even found a purple-skinned mage that tried blasting him with runic magic. But even that didn't help. He just re-emerged at his corpse, just like all the other times he died. In the end, none of this helped, and Ledros always found himself back in this forsaken place without hope. So out of desperation, he tried something new this time. Before Kalista fully disappeared, Ledros called after her. He shouted that he himself was a betrayer. Before Kalista was betrayed by Hecarim, if Ledros was faster, he could have stopped him. He knew Hecarim was looking for a reason to kill Kalista. If Ledros stepped forward as soon as the order was given, he could have saved her. But he wasn't fast enough, and instead he failed her. One could say he betrayed her with his inaction. That is all Kalista needed to hear to name Ledros just another betrayer. A moment later, she drove one of her spears through his heart. But as she did so, her memories shot back. Suddenly, Kalista saw Ledros with her own eyes, and she couldn't believe what she had done. Ledros wanted to assure her that he did it for her, but he couldn't make his words come out of his mouth. Instead, his spirit was reclaimed by the mist once more, and everything got covered in darkness. The next time he opened his eyes, he was back at the start again. He saw his own death. He was bleeding out on the white stone, surrounded by his killers. And then he was brought back to reality. At least this time he didn't see Thresh around. He did see her though. Kalista was nearby, and Ledros was filled with joy. He managed to bring her back, or so he thought. She walked right past him, with her lifeless expression again. Someone far away on a continent to the northwest made a pledge. They traded their soul for vengeance. And so Kalista stepped into the mist again, ready to slay another betrayer. This made Ledros realize that there is in fact no hope. No matter what he does, no matter what he changes, Kalista could never be free, just like Thresh said. Maybe Ledros felt like he was in prison, but Kalista didn't seem tormented. With this thought, Ledros yanked the pendant from his neck and hurled it into the mist. In the next scene, Thresh stepped out of the darkness again. He looked around, ensuring that he was alone. He then knelt down and picked up the necklace. Thresh knew how close Ledros was to his victory. The end of his task was right in front of him. But at the very moment of success, he gave up. And that amused Thresh. He opened his lantern and tossed the pendant inside. He then stepped back into the darkness and faded away. This was the complete story of Kalista. I like how the short story gave us more context on how specters work. No matter how many times they die, they always return to their bodies, similar to how Mordekaiser used to work. But you may have noticed that some pieces of that story were left behind. For example, the story didn't actually mention how the Blessed Isles blew up. That part will be in Hecarim's story. So don't worry, we will have a look at this story from his point of view too. And because we need to please the YouTube gods with 10 minutes videos, I'll cover the entire story of the Ruined King too. Hey, did you know that we have social media and Twitch where we talk about other League facts and stories? And did you know that we have need mugs and shirts too? The links to all of that will be below. And as always, thank you, come again.